Good morning and welcome to Our Issues Milwaukee. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. This morning, we'll focus on several issues, starting with a situation involving local faith leaders. Historically, the Black church has been a place for creating individual, systemic, and political change within the Black community. From its emergence in the late 18th century to its present-day relevance, the Black church has and will always serve as a safe haven for African Americans, a place to worship together, and a place where the congregation is motivated to rebuild the community. My first guests know all too well the important role that the church plays. Pastor Greg Lewis is the assistant pastor at St. Gabriel Church of God and the founder of Soul to the Polls. And Pastor Steve Tipton, he is the pastor of El Bethel Church of God in Christ in Milwaukee. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it. Recently, a group of faith leaders gathered for a rally at Milwaukee City Hall, and I'd like for you all to tell us about that gathering and why you all came together to take on something that you're calling Tax and Take.
Sure, I'll be glad to answer that, and thank you for having me on, Andrea. The reason why we were down at City Hall is because there was a problem that's happening in our city. And that problem stems around the city taxing churches. Now, most people that I share this with are saying, well, churches are not taxed. And we agree. We are protected by the Constitution and First Amendment. Whether we 501c3 or not, a worshiping house is protected. But lately, within the last 3 years, more and more churches are being taxed and having to pay huge sums amount, thousands of dollars, just to get off the tax roll. It happened to me personally, and I had to go through the process, Andrea. And so when I went through the process, I said to myself and the others that I don't want no other pastor to go through this. It's a terrible process, literally tossed from department to department. And I literally spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get a church that was already fully paid for back into my possessions. And so we had enough. The clergy, the ministers, the church, we had enough of them deciding that they want to take money from us when they want to, or tax us without understanding the taxation code that we're under. And so we was down at City Hall and we made some noise and we said we could not allow this to go on any longer.
Mm-hmm. So, Pastor Lewis, can you explain where this kind of switched over the last 3 years and why it switched?
Well, the city is kind of having some financial issues, and part of the solution has been our local churches. We've been tax exempt for years and years and years and years, and now the city is questioning whether a entity is tax exempt, and they can't really take your tax exemption. All they can do is ignore it. And that's one of the things that we're trying to make clear to folks who have these buildings. You can't really let the city come in and start to put these taxes on your property, because if you do that, other things will start to happen also. And now, in the last few years, they've gotten a lot more aggressive because folks just didn't speak up when it was happening to them. And now it's starting to happen so frequently, it hit the wrong person. It hit Pastor Tipton, and we're standing up for it now. For this one reason, you can't tax churches, because the Constitution has allowed churches to, go on tax exempt since the beginning of our country. And then the state is not allowing the cities to tax local church properties. But the city has tried to find ways to add these amounts, these assessments to churches by, first of all, having this letter come out every 2 years. And if the church doesn't, fill out this letter and then send it back to them, then they'll just say that, well, they're not tax exempt anymore. So they assess taxes on them. And after that, what happens is, you may not even know that the city has done this, because you may not get the letter like Pastor Tipton, because they sent his letter to the wrong address. So when you get that, there's a process that you go through to, foreclose on church on a building. So they foreclose on these churches. And by the time you find out, you owe 16, 34, 20,000, 80,000, and they want you to pay that in 30 or 40 days. And this is what's been happening recently in our church community. They tried to do it in the Catholic churches. They tried to do it in the Lutheran churches. And those entities said, no, we're not going to pay you any taxes. We don't even want to set that precedence. And plus, we got lawyers. So then they started doing it to, the churches that they thought were low-hanging fruit, and they've gotten very aggressive with it. It started out that they wanted churches to just volunteer to put money into the city treasury, just to help the city with some of the services that the city provides. And it was a volunteer basis, and not many people were volunteering. We say, well, we got all these large corporations that don't pay taxes at all. Why aren't you, trying to address that issue? But anyway, so we just said that, listen, here's the reality of all of this. We are tax exempt. You cannot just make up reasons to assess taxes to our church properties. It's something like this, Andrea. They'll say, okay, you know what? That room upstairs, you're not using it. We got to tax that room. Your parking lot, we're not going to tax the sanctuary, but we got to tax that parking lot. You just arbitrarily pick places to tax or to assess taxes to, and then if you don't adhere to payment of those taxes, you foreclose on the building. And the way that Pastor Tipton, the way it happened to him is he woke up one Saturday morning and somebody called him and said, hey, I'm going to take good care of your church. He said, what do you mean? Oh, I'm going to buy your church. He said, my church is not for sale. Oh, yes, it is. The city's going to sell it to me. That's how he found out that his church no longer belonged to him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I find it all to be very interesting, and I did read that, Pastor Tipton, that you received a phone call from someone who was interested in buying your church, and you said it's not for sale, and then it actually went into foreclosure during the pandemic. So that is a whole nother situation in itself. So to break it all down, churches have to apply for property tax exemption from the state. Once an exemption is granted, it exists until there's a change in ownership or use of property. Exempt property owners do have to fill out a form with the city every 2 years to let Milwaukee know if there has been a change of use. And then some local faith leaders are believing that this process being used to put churches does not comply. Well, they're putting these churches that don't comply on the tax roll. So this is what the problem ultimately is. And you recently had a meeting where you were able to go to City Hall and hear what the Common Council had to say about this. What was the outcome?
Well, you explained it somewhat better than they did, and I appreciate you for doing that. We have met with the Common Council. And Andrea, one of our goals, first of all, is to get this process changed. It's a very complicated process, and if I had time, or I could even send you the form. It's a 4-page application that you're probably going to need your attorney and your accountant to fill it out. And not understanding the makeup of the churches. That's why we call it a I got you piece of paper, because if you don't fill that out and don't get it to them by March 1st, March 2nd, you're on the tax roll. And what we're saying, Andrea, we met with the Common Council, and we're telling them that needs to change. don't no organization or no person every 2 years have to apply for their job with a 4-page application or apply again to prove that you are a church. Andrea, most those that are listening will agree. Most of the churches that you grew up with or went to are somewhat 40, 50, 60, sometimes 75 years old or older. Mm-hmm. Churches just don't start and stop the next year. They're not startup companies. Churches usually have longevity. Mm-hmm. And so we're asking, and before I went to City Hall, I met with the assessor and said that, listen, can we work something out to where if the letter is not in there, that you don't just take us off the tax exemption and start charging us thousands of dollars. And we got nowhere. And so we met with the Common Council. The meeting was very interesting, I believe very productive. But where we are right now is that we don't want to talk no more. We want things on paper, and we want to come to an agreement, because Andrea, it's not helpful for churches that have just come out of COVID. There are some churches that have not even opened up their churches, and it's been 2 years. They're thinking about opening up in January, but guess what? They've got tax bills that's sometimes starting at $22,000 that have to be paid. When I got the bill, I had 41 days to come up with thousands of dollars, and we was honoring the Safe at Home shutdown from the mayor. And so it was either pay it or lose a church that was totally paid for. And so we're pushing the Common Council to do a moratorium. And that is just to, let's stop this until we can get an understanding, because some of them can't even explain this ordinance and this statute and this process at all. And so if they can't explain it, imagine where we are. We're caught in the middle. Yeah. And so the meeting was productive, but there's a whole lot of work to do, Audrey.
Well, I really wanted you both here to help break it down for people to better understand what is taking place. And Pastor Tipton, you started an alliance of about 280 members.
Yes.
And you also serve as the chaplain for Lutheran Manor, and you're an adjunct business professor at Concordia College. So there are a lot of things that you do here in the community. And then, of course, Pastor Lewis has been on the show many times talking about souls to the polls, and we have a big election year coming up in 2022. So we know the importance of not only the church itself, but those people who are leading the church and what they do to give back to the community. And Pastor Lewis, I do want to give you a minute to really just talk about the importance of people getting involved with the voting process, because you have Pastors United, where you also really involve the church in the voting process.
Yeah, so we have we work with about 540 faith leaders to try to get the vote out during these voting seasons, and on the off seasons we work on other things. But this election coming up is going to be very important, because we have to talk about, a new senator. We're going to be voting on lieutenant governors. We may even have a mayoral race in 22. So people have to make decisions about who's going to represent them. And it's situations like this that really makes it very, very clear that you have to get out and vote, because you want folks to look out for your interests. And if you don't vote, you can't really complain. And we want everybody to know when, where, why, how, and what you need to be voting about. And we're starting that process very, very soon. As a matter of fact, this is part of the process right now, just bringing folks together to understand their power, Andrea. And that's what's happening right now.
All right. Well, I thank you both for coming on and not only bringing us up to date, but just doing what you do. So keep on keeping on. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pastor Greg Lewis is the assistant pastor at St. Gabriel Church of God and the founder of Souls to the Polls. And Pastor Steve Tipton, he's the pastor at El Bethel Church of God in Christ in Milwaukee. Pastor Lewis just brought up the importance of voting. So coming up next, we'll revisit an interview I did with Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. We'll talk about voting and redistricting right after this.